stress, trauma, the human experience, excitement, all these things we focused on up until this point. We've talked about the neurobiology between the different stress responses and anxiety responses and the traumatic responses. We've also spoken about the nervous system and how that responds. In this class, we're going to focus a little bit on the practical elements. How can we overcome a stressful experience, or how can we get on top of or manage more broadly a particular stressful experience or anxiety experience or even a traumatic experience. And to do that, I want to talk about the neuroscience of change. Many of us may have heard the term neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is something that happens from both a negative and positive element. Our brains change based on experience. Neuro relates to brain cell, it derives its name from neuron. Plasticity, on the other hand, refers to something being plastic, malleable, being able to kind of mold it. Neuroplasticity talks about how brain cells change. Donald Hebb was the man who was responsible for the idea that brain cells can change based on experience. And one of his latest students, Carla Schatz, she was a neuroscientist who came up with this very memorable rhyme. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So at its core, neuroplasticity talks about how brain cells can change in terms of how they are structured and how they function based on how much you repeat a particular behavior. Repeat certain thoughts, whether they're good or bad, you'll start to think and latch onto these thoughts more and more. Repeat something good, you'll get the opposite effect. The brain's way of learning, it influences any type of experience that we have, any type of development, any type of lesson that we learn, whether it's brushing our teeth or making our bed, handing in a submission. The brain's way of wiring is instrumental to this. One of the most exciting things that I found in terms of psychotherapy and just growth in general is that depending on what you do, depending on what you tell yourself, that can determine how your brain responds to that issue. There's a significant part of the brain that's located just between your eyes, and it's called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for so many different functions, but one particular structure in the prefrontal cortex is called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex is located towards the middle back area of that particular structure. And the reason I'm telling you this is because the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is so tightly connected with another part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. Now, the nucleus accumbens are part of the mesolimbic pathway, which just kind of sits between the bottom of the brain, if you think about the brainstem, and the limbic system, which is that middle emotional part of the brain. If we bring up our hand model of the brain again, that we've derived from Dan Siegel, you'll see that that's kind of this middle area. Dig deep into the brain, you'll get right over there. And then you've got the front part of the brain here, where you have all these connections together. The mesolimbic pathway is responsible for the release of things like dopamine, and it kind of connects with other brain structures that release adrenaline and allow you to feel movement and feel a sense of, hey, I'm moving towards a particular goal. Now, once a person starts to decide that I'm going to focus on something important, and they visualize that process and then they act out on it, you have the front part of the brain connecting with the middle parts of the brain, which connects to the brain stem, which connects to the rest of the body and allows you to move forward in that action. The reason this is so important is because any particular action, whether we're trying to change the nervous system's response to threat and stress, release a motivation to do so. So you have to have a picture of what you want to achieve to be able to move that forward. And the exercises that I'm going to be showing you today will help you visualize and to act out a particular response so that the nervous system isn't hijacked over and over again when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling traumatized, or when a past trauma continues to come back to you. What I think is the most important though is that once you work towards and you've identified your goal and you act towards it, that mesolimbic pathway becomes reactivated and it releases dopamine and adrenaline throughout the body that entrenches that particular experience so that it's repeated again. Basically what that means is that when you push yourself past a point that you might not be comfortable with and you achieve something at that point, then your brain starts to associate that with a positive response. Vygotsky, who was a psychologist, he came up with a term called the zone of proximal development. Now, the zone of proximal development is a zone that we get ourselves into when we've pushed ourselves just past our limits, our identified limits of what we can achieve, and towards a point where we can start to test ourselves. And once we've done that, we begin to create a sense of mastery over those experiences and we get better at them next time. We see this in kids all the time. Picture your own children or the children of people that you've met along the way in life, or just even your own actions. The more you push yourself to do something that you might not be comfortable with and you overcome that discomfort, that's when that zone of proximal development starts to get wider. Or to use another term, the window of tolerance. In therapy, you may have a window, or in just basic life, you may have a window of what you can tolerate and what you can't. And that window of tolerance sits just above, I'm going to zone out and I'm going to get too heightened. And we kind of go through this every single day, depending on what we're doing. When we do something a little bit tricky, but we master that, then our window of tolerance starts to expand. So whether we're talking about the zone of proximal development, the window of tolerance, or just your basic learning and moving forward with your pushing yourself towards the next level, we're starting to get a sense of, hey, I'm doing something. I'm pushing myself past the limits of what I'm used to. People who exercise are great examples of this because they can literally push themselves 1 minute more, one repetition more, one set more than they're used to, and get to their goal 1 second faster, 10 seconds faster, 10 minutes faster. And with each moment of achievement, the brain and the body begin to learn that, hey, I can do this, I can move forward. So without any more hesitation, let's jump into the fight, flight, freeze, fall, fawn responses in terms of what you can do to overcome and move through them.